Hey, what's up? Welcome back to another quick Flutter tutorial. In this one, we're going to code a to-do app using the BLoC state management. And we will save the data in the device's local storage. And most importantly, we're going to focus on clean architecture so that we write good code. This is one of many apps that I'll be recreating on this channel using Flutter and BLoC. So make sure to subscribe if you want more tutorials like this. Now, lately I've been trying to put more focus into writing clean code. And what do I mean by that exactly? Well, it's kind of a loaded question, but to keep things simple, I want to focus on 3 ideas, which to me constitutes clean code. And that is when it's readable, so that you, me, and everyone's mom can understand. It's scalable, so that we are able to manage the app as it grows in complexity, and modular, so that you can, for example, swap out and change to a different database, and you can easily do that without needing to mess with the rest of the code base. And visually, it will look something like this. So starting with what we call the domain layer. Here we define the core logic of the app. And this layer is technologically agnostic, meaning it's independent of any specific framework or database. Whether we code this up with Flutter or React Native, the fundamental logic remains the same, right? A to-do app is a to-do app. Then on top of that, we have the data layer, which is responsible for connecting your domain layer to a database or an API or something. And so if you decide to change the data source, for example, from local storage to Firebase, then you only need to worry about updating this layer. And finally, we have the presentation layer, which is the UI and state management part of the app. And so this is the rough idea to keep our code nice and organized. So I've opened up a brand new Flutter project, and you should just get this demo counter app. Now I'm going to delete everything below the main function so that we can start this from scratch. So inside our material app, I'm just going to give it a blank scaffold. And if you save this, then you should just get a white blank app like this. And so this is where we'll start. Now the very first thing I'm going to do is let's go to our library and create a new folder. And we're going to start with the domain layer. So inside the domain, let's create another folder called models. And we're going to create our to-do model. So this is what a to-do object is. It's going to have these properties, so the ID, text, and also is completed. So let's create this class real quick. And also the constructors. So I'm going to require the ID. I'm going to require the text. But for the is completed, I'm not necessarily going to require it every time we create it because it should just be false at the beginning anyway. Sweet. And then let's just have one method for the logic. For our to-do app, it's going to just be toggling the completion on and off. So I'm just going to create that method down here, toggle completion. And so we're just going to return the exact same to-do object, except let's just flip the is completed. So true will become false and vice versa. Sweet. And that's it for the model. Cool. Now the other thing we need in the domain layer is a repository. So I'm going to create a to-do repo. In here, you can define what the app can do. So I'm going to create a class that is abstract. And abstract means this is just the base class. So we're going to build on top of this class. But on a very fundamental level, in a to-do app, we just want to be able to do, say, 4 things. Get the list of to-dos. We want to be able to add a new to-do. We also want to update an existing to-do. And then finally, we want to delete a to-do. Right, so these are the 4 things that we're just going to define here. Cool, so these are our 4 methods. Now, note the repo in this domain layer outlines what operations the app can do. but it doesn't worry about the specific implementation details. So that's for the data layer. So everything in the domain layer should be technology agnostic. And what that means is it's just independent of any technology or framework, right? This is just purely a Dart file and has nothing to do with Flutter or BLoC or anything else. No matter what technology we use, this is what I want my to-do app to perform. Sweet. And so now we're going to implement the data layer. In the library, I want you to create another folder called data. I'm going to create another models folder, and we're going to create a similar to do, but we're going to call this ISAR to do because we're going to use the ISAR local storage. But you can use any database here that you prefer. And so I'll show you how to do it with the ISAR database, which I think works fine. But the main takeaway here is less to do with the ISAR database, but more to do with the separation of concerns, right? How we're separating these folders out from domain layer and data layer. And so we already had that to-do model, but we're just going to use this to convert it to an ISAR to-do model so that we can store it in our ISAR database. Let's open up our terminal, and I'm going to add in the ISAR packages. So Flutter pub add, we're going to add a few things: ISAR Flutter libs, and also the path provider. I made a separate tutorial on how to use ISAR, so check that out if you need, but I can show you here real quick how to use it. So once you got those first set of dependencies in, we have to add another set of dependencies for the dev dependencies. So I want you to type flutter pub add -d ISAR generator and also the build runner. Cool. So this is all in the documentation for ISAR, but just to show you what we just did, if you go to your pubspec YAML, which is where we handle all of our packages, you can see we just added these three in the dependencies, and we also have some developer dependencies like here. Just make sure you're following along. So let's create this class. It's going to be very similar to the to-do model we just created. But we're going to have two methods here. So firstly, to convert the ISAR object to a pure to-do object so that we can use it in our app. And the second one is vice versa. So converting our pure to-do object into an ISAR object so that we can store it in the ISAR database. So currently we're in the data layer. And so this method I'm going to call toDomain so that we can convert this object for the domain layer. And then the second method here, we're going to call fromDomain. Awesome. And then just a couple of ISAR specific coding is we just need to give it the collection tag at the top. And also we're going to say part ISAR todo.g.dart. So it's the exact same file name as what we have, except we just got that G in the middle so that we can generate this ISAR to do object. Now we can run this bit of code. And then you should be able to see in that models folder, you got the same ISAR file, but it generated this new file. And you can see here, do not modify by hand. So don't do anything to this file. We just needed to do this so that we can store custom objects in our database. Cool, but that's done for the models. And finally, we have to just create the repository so that we can build on top of this. So this to-do database repository is all about the implementation in the ISAR database. Right, so what I'm going to say is class ISAR to-do repo implements to-do repo. So remember we created in our domain layer this to-do repo, and we defined that we need to fill out these 4 methods, right? So that's what we're doing here. We're implementing the repository for our ISAR database. So with a given database, let's fill out those 4 methods. And if you start typing get, you should be able to see the get to-dos, and that will just come up straight away from the to-do repo. Right, so let's now fill out this implementation. So we want to fetch from the database. And then we're going to just return the list of to-dos and give to the domain layer. So let's go to our database and go to the to-dos and just get all of them. You can see there's a red squiggle there, and so if you highlight over it, you can see it says that we haven't finished implementing. It's missing the add, to do, delete, and the update. So these are methods all just defined from the repository that we defined here in the domain layer. So again, now in the next one, we can start typing add to do, and then it'll automatically give this method. We have to fill out the update to do, and also the delete to do. So let's go through and fill out each of these. So if I'm going to add a new to-do, firstly, let's convert the to-do into an ISAR to-do object so that we can store it in our database. Cool. And if you look at this put keyword here, you can see it says insert or update. So it actually does both of them. Like if I'm adding a new to-do, and then if it doesn't exist in our list, then it's just going to insert it. And if it already exists, then it's going to update it. So this put keyword is pretty helpful, which means the code for adding the to-do and the updating to-do is actually the exact same. But I'm still just going to separate it just so that the naming is consistent. And finally, let's fill out the delete. Awesome. So we've implemented the 4 methods for our ISAR database. And this is our data layer, which we built on top of the domain layer. Cool, which means it's time for us to fill out the last part, which is the presentation layer. So let's start off with a file called to-do-qubit. And so this is for our state management. Each qubit is a list of to-dos. So if you haven't already seen, I just made a BLoC tutorial for beginners. So check that out first before you watch this. But we're going to try to implement it to this app right now. So firstly, you're going to have to open up your terminal and let's add in the package. Flutter pub add Flutter BLoC. Now we can say class to-do-qubit extends the qubit. You can see that it's showing there. So let's hit enter to auto import. And every time we make a qubit, we're going to define the type. And for us, it's just a list of to-dos. So let's fill out the qubit. So firstly, I'm going to just reference the repository. We're going to need a constructor to just initialize it with an empty list. And at the very beginning, let's just load up the to-dos. So we want to load, add, delete, and then toggle. Now, starting with the load to-dos, you can see we can go to the to-do repo and get to-dos. And so just to keep this connected to the big picture so that you understand what's going on, this get to-dos is being called from our presentation layer, right? And this get to-dos is what we just defined in our domain layer. And the actual implementation is over here in the data layer. Right, so all these 3 things are connected, okay? Except in the presentation layer, we're just dealing with the state management part of it. So once we load up the list of to-dos, then we can emit the fetch list as the new state. Cool, now for adding a new to-do, let's firstly create the new to-do with a unique ID. And then we're going to save it to the repo. And then let's just reload everything. Now, when it comes to the ID, we could just give it an integer, say like 0, 1, 2. Or another easy way to go about this is to just give it the date time of right now. And you can go to say like the milliseconds since epoch. So this will just be an integer depending on the current time. So everyone's going to have a unique ID. Sweet. And so let's go to the to-do repo and then add it there. And just reload. We're going to do something similar for the delete. So just delete it from the repo and reload. And then finally, we can toggle the completion status. So let's get the updated to do once it's toggled the completion, right? And this method, we actually did the logic for this in the models in the domain layer, which is where all the logic is meant to be. And then finally, we can update the to do in the repository. And then just reload everything. Sweet, so we've done the main methods here for the qubit. So let's finish off this presentation layer. We need to make a to-do page now. And so the to-do page is responsible for providing the qubit to the view. And the view is just the UI. And to do this, you're going to use a BLoC provider. So let's create a stateless widget called to-do page. And I want you to accept the repository at the top. And when I return this, you're going to use a BLoC provider. Cool, so this BLoC provider is providing the qubit to our view. And the view we haven't created, so let's just create that real quick. So the to-do view is responsible for the UI. And so for this page, you want to use a BLoC builder. Cool, so this, I'm going to build the UI. Let's just start off with a big scaffold. And the main thing here is I want to have a floating action button. And if I click this button, then I want to show a to-do box so that the user can type. Okay, so when I call this method, let's grab our qubit. And I'm also going to have a text controller so that we can access what the user typed. And let's show an alert dialog. And so in the middle, I want to have a text field so that the user can type in. And I want to have in the actions 2 buttons, cancel button and add button. So for the cancel button, when you hit it, you just want to pop the box. And for the add button, you want to pop the box, but before that, you want to go to our qubit and just add the to-do. Looking good. Now let's come back to the scaffold, and in the body, we're going to have a BLoC builder. And every time we use a BLoC builder, we just need to specify the qubit and also the type, which for us is a list of to-dos. So we can go to our builder and we're going to return a list view. You can see this state. You can see it's the list of to-dos. So let's just call it to-dos. And let's try to build this list. Starting with the item count, that'll just be the length of the to-dos. And let's get the individual to-do object from the list. And we're going to use a list tile UI. So 3 bits of information, the text, and then the checkbox, and then the delete button. Cool, so for the checkbox, the value is just true or false. So that's just going to be the to-do is completed status. And then on the onChanged, we need to go to our qubit. So let's create that here. And then you can go to the qubit and now say toggle the completion. And then we're going to do the similar thing for the delete. Sweet, and that is the to-do view, so the UI for the app. So if I come back to my to-do page, let's import what we just created. Right, and now it's time for us to go to the main function and put this all together. So in the main, I'm just going to change this to an asynchronous, and we always have to do this widgets flutter binding ensure initialize at the beginning. And I'm just going to do some setting up for our database. So firstly, I just want to get the directory path to know where we're going to store the data. Then let's open the ISAR database. Then let's initialize our repository with this database, and then we can run the app. So when you open the ISAR database, you can see that we can give it the to-do ISAR schema. That's what we created earlier. And just give it the directory path. Cool, then we can initialize our repo and give it the database. And finally, if you look at the My App, we're going to inject the database throughout the app by requiring this to-do repo. So the My App requires the repository, and we can now give it our one. Sweet, now everything is done. Now when there's a lot of packages going back and forth, it's a good idea to just kill the app and restart it so that everything's working fine, which is what I'm going to do now. I'm just going to kill the app and rebuild this. Sweet, here's our to-do app. You can see the plus button on the bottom. Let's type a new to-do, and you can see we can add it in, and I can check it off. Cool, so you can add more, check them off and delete them, and everything's working fine. Now the main point and idea I want you to learn from this video is not necessarily just how to code up a to-do app, but to focus more on the architecture of the app and how we used BLoC to write our code in a very clean way. So just to summarize what we did, at the very beginning, we're just initializing our database and we're going to our to-do page, which, whoops, looks like we can adjust the test. Now, we're not going to worry about testing right now, so I'm just going to comment this out. But yeah, so my app goes to this to-do page. And this to-do page is responsible for providing the qubit to the view, where the view is just the UI. And to do that, we're going to use a BLoC provider to provide the qubit to the view. And the view, like I said, is just responsible for the UI, which we're going to use a BLoC builder in this case. And then the qubit is responsible for the state management, and that is the presentation layer. Then we've got the domain layer, which is the most core fundamental part of your app, right? Like we've got the models. So we've got the to-do model here. And this, like I mentioned before, is independent of the framework and database you use, right? This is just pure Dart code. Same thing with the repository, the to-do repo. This just defines what the app can do, but doesn't worry about the implementation of it. It just says what to do and not necessarily how to do it yet, because that is for the data layer. And so for the data layer, we can use many different databases. In this particular example, I used the ISAR database. So this should have the actual implementation details. And so separating the code into these three layers, presentation, domain, and data layer, is the fundamental idea of clean architecture. And so it makes our code much more easier to read and also easier to maintain, test, and it just makes it modular so that, let's say we don't want to use ISR database anymore, then we can swap it out very easily with a new database, and all you need to worry about now is just the data layer, right? Just because you use a new database doesn't mean that the functionality of the to-do app should change. So I hope I got my message across. I'm going to continue making complex apps from here on out using BLoC and clean architecture. So let me know if you have any trouble. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.